Joining us all today on if you're in the UK, a drizzly Friday morning, certainly where I am. I am really excited about the panel that I have today, and I was just letting them know that I'm going to do things slightly differently this morning. So I am going to share with you all the story behind today and why it is that I have you all here to talk about gamification and play. And when I tell that story, I will introduce I'm going to use some of Callum's language. The characters will appear as I go through the story, and I will let you know who is joining me today. But what I want to do is I want to welcome you all, and I know that we have a diverse audience online. And I love it when we have diverse audiences because you all come at things from different angles. So do please share your insights as we go through. I know that some of us online are coaches and are here to find out a little bit more about how we can use play in our coaching practice. I know that we have some learning and development experts who are here to think about it from the training side. And I also know that we have some business development, client development experts on the line who are particularly interested in the problem that Christian looked to solve at KPMG. So welcome to all of you. The session is geared to hit all of those different needs and wants. So hopefully you will all find it of use. I am recording the session today and it will be shared as a listen again. So if you don't want to appear on screen, then please keep your video off. But if you don't mind, then you can keep your video on. We like to see your smiling faces. I'm going to start with a poll just to wake us all up and to get a little bit of insight into how you use play at work. So hopefully this works. And you can see there 3 questions. Ignore the last one because it doesn't have a question. But the first one is, I use play as part of my role or in my work. And the second question is, what is your interest in play and gamification? All of the answers are anonymous, so don't worry about how you answer those. Perfect. So the answers are trickling in. We've got a couple more still to answer. Perfect. So let me share the results with you just so that you can see what I'm seeing. So I asked you who uses play as part of their role, and we've got a real mix here. So that's interesting. Some people use it all the time. Some people only use it some of the time. And some of you here out of curiosity, and some think it would be a hard sell. We will be talking about that hard sell at one point in the session today, I am sure. And then in terms of interest in playing gamification, as I've already hinted at, really a real mix. So people here interested in coaching, training, innovation, engaging professionals, business development and other. So that's fantastic. And hopefully we will tick the box for you. But if you have any specific questions, then do please ask as we go through. So let me now share my screen. I don't have too many slides, but I do have a few. And what I want to do now is I want to share the story with you of why I have you all here. So corporate training isn't all fun and games, but maybe it should be. So that was the kickoff line in an article that appeared in the March-April issue of the Harvard Business Review. And it speaks about a study that was conducted at KPMG, which showed that gamified training, when done right, can significantly improve employee performance. And I reached out to Christian Gossan, who is speaks as well. There's a little interview with you, Christian, in the article in the magazine, and I was delighted when he said yes. And he is going to, when I stop talking, kick us off and talk a little bit about what he did at KPMG and why he had the amazing results that he did. So thank you very much, Christian, for joining us. Now, I don't use gamification, but one of the things that I do use is Lego Serious Play. And when I was reading the article, my mind started firing, and I started thinking about how my Lego Serious Play help solve the problem that KPMG had around cross-selling and making sure that people understood what the services were in order to be able to identify opportunities. Now, for those people who don't know what Lego Serious Play is, it is a facilitated meeting, communication and problem-solving technique for groups. And some of the benefits that I see with Lego Serious Play are it enables teams to go very deep very quickly. And it also helps people remember and retain information that I think that they would otherwise struggle to do. So my mind was firing, and that kicked off a conversation that I had with Callum. So Callum O'Neill joins us today. Callum is a coach. He is also an actor by training, and he has researched the role of real play in coaching. And so I'm really delighted to have him on the line as well. And we were talking about this idea of getting into flow, which is very much something that exists in Lego Serious Play. And one of the things I want to share with Lego is I think often people kind of turn to Lego because they think it will be fun. And it is, but it's not uncommon for really deep emotions to come to the surface with Lego Serious Play. And I have seen many tears over Lego, and not just from my children when they're fighting over it. So it's a really interesting tool, and it's enhanced my curiosity about play more generally. And that brings me to the third of our speakers, and that is Teresa Leyman, who is also a coach, and she has just co-authored a book on play in coaching. So again, really, really looking forward to hearing from Teresa. Now, before we do that, I want to speak a little bit about play and what do we mean by play. Dr. Jenny Robinson, who I'm not sure is online, but is due to be joining us later, recommended a wonderful podcast to me by Andrew Huberman on the neuroscience of play. And I just want to share a few of the insights that I got from that podcast. And one of the things that Andrew described is what he means by play. And for him, play is about exploring new ways of being. So it's a low stakes, so low adrenaline, really important way of experimenting. And in experimenting, you allow yourself more outcomes. He also speaks about how play is crucial for our development, really important for children, but also important for adults. And he describes play as the fundamental portal to plasticity. Now, some of you online will know what neuroplasticity is. It is the capacity of the brain to change and to rewire itself, and that can happen throughout our lifetimes. It's why we can learn new things. And Huberman says that for neuroplasticity, what we need is focus and rest. And for him, play is a really unique way of achieving that. And again, my mind was firing through the podcast. I am trained in Gestalt, and a lot of Gestalt is around experimentation and trying new things. So, so with that in mind, I'm going to end on my final slide, and then I'm going to bring in my panelists because I'm sure you are here to learn from them as much as I am. Now, I think we can often see play as a spectrum, and on one side we have the kind of, I guess, the fun and the silly side of play, and on the other side we have, you know, the more serious adult. And I think oftentimes we think about kind of children on that kind of silly fun side, and, you know, adults on the other. And I think, you know, the first question I asked was, how easy or otherwise do you think it would be to incorporate play and gamification into your work day? And you know, I don't think this spectrum provides an answer when the answer is, you know, actually it would be quite difficult to do, and it's something I'm going to pick up with Christian. But before I do that, again, I just want to do a quick poll to see where you are on that spectrum. So let me see if I can get the right one. So with me. So just a quick question, and the question is, how playful are you? And with Teresa in particular, we're going to be talking about these definitions of play and playfulness, and we're going to learn a lot more about what those definitions mean and how we can tap into those. So where is everybody? And this itself, for coaches on the line, is a really interesting question to explore with your coachees. You know, do they experiment? Are they playful? If not, why not? So I will share it there, and it's interesting. So I would actually call myself probably at the more serious end of the spectrum, which is possibly something behind my curiosity around play and how it can be used. So let me share the results with you. So we have a real mix. Nobody who's kind of put themselves as playful all the time, but some of you playful a lot of the time, some of you more at the serious end, and some of you perhaps playful in the right setting. And I think that's probably a good representation when we start to introduce gamification and play into the workplace of where people are at. And actually, again, mentioned this idea of flow and making sure that everyone is comfortable and that their adrenaline levels are low is a really important part of all of this. So I'm going to stop sharing that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to introduce Christian. So Christian, I've already given a little bit of insight into who you are and why you are here. And perhaps we can start just by trying to understand a little bit more about the problem you were looking to solve at KPMG and how that problem led you to gamification.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Claire. I just realized I'm on the serious end of that spectrum, so I better try and liven myself up before we kick things off. We had a really common problem that professional services firms have, which is the bigger your firm is, the increase in the number of different service offerings that you have for your clients. So at KPMG in Australia, we had 8,000 people helping clients with over 150 different things. And they are, as boring as they sound, audit, tax, and advisory offerings in a big, thick booklet that was produced really well. The design of the booklet was nice. It was in nice high gloss paper, all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, it was a static piece of information with some really boring but important content. And I like, the more I think about this, it had a lot going for it. The employees are actually quite motivated. They're very conscientious and want to do well at their jobs, all those things. The information in there will help them do their jobs, and they want to be better at their jobs, as KPMG people are, pretty usually pretty well intentioned with that sort of stuff. But the problem was just the form. And so when I looked at this problem, I said, it's a problem that's not going to go away. So in a year's time, if I don't solve the problem now, it's not going away. And it's a big problem because it affects all client-facing staff. And previous attempts had failed. The previous attempts were the really boring static form, or they were really expensive, non-scalable product fairs where the people who actually did all the things would come in and sort of tell everyone about it, but really expensive to do. So we sort of went with the opposite. We went with the problem statements and said, well, if the current way of doing things is boring, how can we make it fun? If it's not scalable, how could we make it scale through digital? If at the moment it's isolated, how can we sort of maybe put some sense of competition in there, a few things like that. And we sort of flipped all of the problems and arrived at a question of, if we tried to gamify learning about the services guide, would it be a better result than than the current state at the moment? And so we did a really small pilot in Australia with that. It's 7,000 people at the firm. We had about 800 people participate in this pilot. We made this really cheesy, really corny, cheap, flash-based game where your little athlete would run quicker if you got a question, right. It was like a rip-off of Wii Sports back, 10 years ago. And so really cheesy. We got it done by an independent, like a little indie agency that was literally down an alleyway. And that was for about, probably 10, 15,000 US dollars type thing. So no money at all. Work said to me, this is just after hours, so it was just this sort of thing on the side that I did, but the results went really, really well. We saw a 21% improvement in service offering awareness. And interestingly, we had a whole bunch of stories of people saying, oh, I was speaking with a client, and then I remembered, because of the games, which is what we imaginatively named it as. I remember that we do that, so I could introduce people at the firm to my client. I felt more confident doing that, and so we sort of started with that problem and arrived at maybe this gamification stuff could help, not actually knowing that gamification was a field, and sort of fell into it that way. Our global head of sales saw what we were doing and said, do you want to stop your full-time role as a management consulting, helping CFOs fix finance functions and cost optimization? And do you want to come and try and attempt to influence our, at the time, 150,000 people in over 100 countries? And so I couldn't not try and do something at that scale. And that was really cool. And that was sort of, 10 years ago. It was interesting that we had that skepticism from day one. You can imagine KPMG being a conservative place, like, much of the other accounting and legal firms, where the people there aren't hired there for their looks. They're all very cynical, hard-nosed business people. And so, we really had to go hard on all the data parts of this to make sure that we were capturing all of the data, and that enabled us to actually go and get some academic muscle to help us answer the question of, does this gamified learning stuff actually help our salespeople sell and help the firm make money? Or is it just something that's fun and superfluous and not worth really investing in? So that's sort of how I got into this whole gamification business.
There are so many questions that I could kind of pick up on there. I think perhaps starting with this scalability idea. So you started with a pilot, you started with something that was kind of low risk, I guess, both in terms of budget, in the context of kind of the KPMG budget, and it was kind of tailored to, your home turf, your, culturally, you were very much aligned. What problems did you have when you started to scale, and how did you start to solve some of those problems?
So I think, there's a risk with anything gamified, that people don't take you seriously. I think that's a personal risk that anybody embarking on this has, to the point where we stopped using the G word at KPMG many years ago, because what we found was that when I'm speaking to business sponsors and business leaders, I want to be talking to them about training and improved conversations with clients. And that's what I want to be talking about them. I'm distracting or entertaining learners with the gamified functionalities. But if I start talking about that with sponsors, sometimes they can get distracted by that, but also become skeptical about it. So I first off, from a risk point of view, I wouldn't really talk about gamification, use the G word, because I think it sends people sometimes down the wrong pathway for those reasons of bias that you mentioned earlier, Claire. Mm-hmm. As we got bigger, I think, when you go from one country, there are just so many risks of trying to create a user experience for more than one person. Like, as soon as you go past yourself, you get into trouble of, maybe people aren't going to like this anymore. And so even just a male versus female, a gender divide, and how you design for males versus females, we got female designers in very quickly to take away that bias from us that we didn't realize that we were doing. Then you start saying, okay, we have to roll this out in 50 countries. Let's go. Let's try and tiptoe across sort of Americans who like to overshare, Japanese people who don't share, cultures that love to gamble versus cultures where it's a sin for them to gamble. And once you're starting to get global audiences designing for something that isn't offensive, but also then isn't really lame and boring, is a really fine line. So that's something that we found as the biggest risk. And the thing that kept me up most at night when we were designing is this just going to be really terrible? And that apart from all the other sort of known risks about security and privacy and, you know, all those sort of less interesting risks. The one about just boring people to tears with something that's gamified and really lame, and you know, that was something that we really worried about. But also just offending people, you know, doing something that you think is going to be an engaging experience for somebody that actually then is offensive to their culture, or just doesn't click with them. So they're the sort of things that kept us up at night, but also just having credibility and trying to really prove to people that what we were doing was serious, and that it did have business objectives. And this is the evidence that we were going off, that we were partnering with academic institutions to help us to prove that as well, that it wasn't just crazy Christian going away and thinking this stuff all works when it doesn't, you know. So getting some academic muscle behind you, or getting some sort of more sober people around the table, is something that we thought was a good idea and turned out to be a good idea.
And you've mentioned kind of the academic muscle a couple of times now, and
Yep.
my coaching hat is wanting me to ask. It's interesting because you mentioned you're at the serious side and you brought them in. So you know, the driver behind bringing in that muscle, where did it come from, is where I'm thinking. But what did you learn about gamification by bringing in the academics, and you know, what really made a difference in terms of the messaging going back? Because I'm conscious that, you know, the different range of people on the line, not everyone is going to have the ability to tap up Harvard. So what learning did you take from them that, you know, can be of use to others?
Yeah, I think it's a generalization for any gamified learning project, is that you know, 99% of it's not about the gamification. It's not about the mechanics that you're using in the design. It's about all the other things that are around it. So for me, I needed help with my pitching to heads of sales in different countries. And so to do that, I needed to, my decks needed to show that we were, and my presentations need to show that we were, you know, this is what we're trying to achieve from a business objective. You might think that this is silly or for children or but it's based in this type of science, and we've got an academic helping us to ensure that what we are doing here, they're going to tell us whether it is actually helping us or not. So I will be judged 100% yes or no whether this thing works, because as we did that research project, the results, we didn't have control over the results. So we shared everything openly with them, but they were allowed to obviously publish whatever they want. We had no control over it. So it's a slightly risky proposition, isn't it? You know, you've just put your whole career into creating these experiences, and you're hoping that someone who doesn't publicly publish that it's all been for nothing, which would have been slightly devastating. But that was, I sort of in my heart knew that it was working. We just needed someone to help us to prove that.
And I'm assuming it was an iterative process. So, you know, through your kind of, you know, from the pilot through to I guess where it is now, where you left it, what were the key things that you kind of learned along the way?
I think always looking for the next project as well. So the project that was in the Business Review article, I mean, we finished and started rolling that out 8 years ago, and it's been sort of ongoing since then. Since then, we've built another several platforms for other business problems that KPMG had. So as we had success with one project, people said, do you think you could sort of turn your mind towards this other problem? And it would always be, can't we just use that platform for that problem? And I think sometimes that's where people get into trouble. It's just like, let's just throw competitions and points at like another problem and it will work there. So we've always had very, very, very deliberate, very unique digital experiences for the different business problems we've had. And so my advice would be, while you're sort of having some success with one, always be listening to the business to see what other things that they're having problems with, and whether that's also something that you can help with. But yeah, we have also, there wasn't really a guidebook as to how to create and activate gamified learning in 100 countries. Like it didn't exist for us. So we just sort of made lots of mistakes and had a genuine heart about everything that we were doing, and that has allowed us to keep faith and trust with all of our stakeholders around the world that what we were doing was is genuinely for the good, even when we had some cases of cheating, addiction, some of those sort of really negative type things happening, how we had to deal with those, and enabled us to preserve the trust that we had with our stakeholders.
Thank you. I know it's going to be the same for both Teresa and for Callum, that I could quite easily take up an hour asking questions, but I'm going to get Teresa's voice in next. Thank you so much, Christian. I can see that there are some comments in the chat and I will pick those up. And if you do have questions, if you're like me and you can't retain a question for half an hour, do pop it in the chat and we'll pick those up when we get to the end and we've got time for Q&A. But for now, thank you ever so much, Christian. So I'm going to bring Teresa in now, and I've already mentioned she's just co-authored a book on play in coaching. And I guess just kind of kicking off, play, gamification, slightly different things, but kind of lots of similarities there. So maybe just starting off, if anything particularly resonated with you from what Christian has said, and otherwise just to kind of introduce what you mean by play, what you mean by playfulness, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Gosh, and absolutely, I could talk to Christian for hours. I've got so many questions. I think we could do a full day or a week on this, couldn't we? I think kind of just thinking about some of the things that Christian was sharing there and how it relates to what we've been exploring in the world of coaching. Very much, I'm quite heartened actually to hear, the story there with KPMG, such a big company. And for me, it kind of boils down to, there's a lot there around engagement, accessibility, really understanding it. Kind of there's the invite and permission to bring people in. And, if you're going to walk a path, which is kind of what started our kind of exploration in this area, there's many reasons why we did the research and we're fortunate enough to write the book. But if you're going to walk a path and you have two options, very somber, on your own, people aren't engaged, versus, another path where people can join in whatever way, share their thoughts, share their feelings, add information, why wouldn't you go on that other path? Particularly in a world where there's much increasing complexity, we're more reliant now than ever to solve the bigger problems, to kind of engage all the minds. Sometimes this stuff is, all the challenges that we have, particularly in the VUCA environments, where there's things that are highly uncertain, challenging. You need more than one person to be able to come together, co-create. And what I found through kind of working in change environments, very high stress, high stakes change environments, often in technology, for over about 25 years, working for some of the big high-tech blue chip companies that you would know. Naturally, we found in order to solve those big complex problems, we needed to bring people together. And in order to create those safe environments, taking more of a playful way, and that can be quite a loaded word, can't it? Playful. And I'll come back to that in a moment, Claire, and we can really kind of go into that, but really kind of just shaping why would you step into engaging with play or playful ways? Well, what I found is in a myriad of ways, it's to help people engage, share ideas, co-create. And in a modern world, we need that more than ever, I think. So it's to solve the bigger problems and also the smaller stuff. And like I said right at the beginning there, if you're going to walk a path, which would you prefer? We have short lives, even if we're living to, beyond 100, bless us, it's still a short life. Why wouldn't you bring more in? I think on that word playfulness, and I'll step into that a bit more, but I think Dr. Stuart Brown, for me, summed it up. You know, when you think about play, sometimes, you know, and the spectrum that you put there right at the beginning of the talk, you know, you talk about play, sometimes people think the opposite is work. Dr. Stuart Brown shares, you know, in his wonderful works and book, you know, the opposite is actually depression. And again, if we're trying to engage people either in our workforces or organizations, charities, communities, even our home lives, you know, our families and anything where we're trying to engage people, do you want a depressed society to be with? You know, why? Well, how is that helpful? How is it helpful to be so serious that people are log-jammed, you know, they can't think straight, they're moved into stress, flight or flight, and we know all the details there about stress. You know, it's probably one of the top killers in the Western world. What, you know, it's insanity in some ways that we would be putting people that we need or that we care about into these states unnecessarily. So yeah, so playfulness, I think, is very much an antidote to some of that. It's a solution. It's something that can be very helpful. What isn't helpful is our interpretation and loadedness of that word. And I think, like Christian shared, you know, at the beginning, he stopped, you know, he wasn't using the G words, gamification, because people, you know, either got distracted by it or, you know, were skeptical. And yet look at some of the results there that it's yielding. And there's just a natural curiosity in our book with the research that we were lucky enough to do. What we found is there's no global definition yet of play. And I think it's something that is emerging. And particularly since COVID, I would say, you know, things have tilted there. Probably people are realizing there's just more we can be doing better. Some of the storytellers we invited in, so we've got a myriad of storytellers that come from a field of coaching, science, therapy worlds, just to say, when we talk about play and playfulness, how is it showing up in your practice? And quite a few of them are saying, well, I haven't really thought about it, but now I am. It's showing up in a myriad of ways, and we explore that more. And I don't know if you want to show the slide quickly.
Yes,
Claire.
I was going to. So engaged. lost my role, which is slide showing. There we go.
You have to control me a little bit because
there we are.
I just love this topic so much, and you know, really the invite is to say, let's reclaim the words a little bit here. And do we really need to use the word play and playfulness? I think for a time, yes, but then it should just be the norm. You know, it's something that you use in context and in the coaching field, in service, you know, of whatever it is that you're trying to do. So it just becomes something that's accessible. You're equipped to ignite it and step into that freely, and it's credible. So I think that's some of the areas that we want to ignite more of, and that's very much the invite for all the wider communities, not across, you know, not only across coaching but therapy, which I know adopts much more of this, so they're very rich in this area, but then also all organisations for some of the reasons that I've shared. But let me just step into this slide slightly. So doing and being, you asked that question there about what is the difference there between play and playfulness. To be honest, you know, we could interchange those words, and you know, we could be quite broad on that. So, but for the book purposes and what the areas that we were trying to kind of layer out for people is, initially when you think about play, you might go to, you know, yourself as a child in the playground. You're doing, you know, you're playing with objects, so whether that's, you know, dolls or balls or you know, all the skipping ropes, you know, all the stuff that, you know, football, all the things that you think about as a child where you would have engaged in play, that tends to be the first place that people might start to draw an image of what that is. So it's the doing, so very much in that left side of the bridge there. And as we started to step into it more, we were saying, well, is it just about props? Is it just about artifacts? Is it just about using environmentals such as, like we've got here in my backdrop here, it transports people. So environmentals and props are very useful for symbolizing and igniting the permission of play, as well as the doing. So like you said about Lego serious play, it's a wonderful way to create modelling, constellation work that John Whittington and the team have developed with what they do there, with the benefits of modelling. All these things, whether you're doing artwork, drawing, it's creating a space where you can try and articulate what's going on and then step back together and look at it from this different view. So it's an aid to that. So that's more on the doing side. And then if you imagine kind of different layers almost coming within ourselves, our way of being. So over the bridge, we have expressions of play or playfulness. So this is where we're starting to think about how is play showing up. So less tangible. They're not particularly objects, it's more our way of being. So are we being a bit more whimsical? Are we being intentional? And right through then to, how are we using humour? That's a big factor in some of this to some degree. But our way of being, and some of the examples the archetype of a way of being playful, is when you see Desmond Tutu or the Dalai Lama, they've all got the twinkle in the eye, and they may not be doing anything particular. They may not have any props or, engaging in let's play and do this thing. It's just within their being. And what we're seeing is as soon as you ignite that, others respond in kind. We know a lot now, much more in research world around emotional contagion. We know innately the people that we can be safe with, vulnerable with. And so if you can play with people, it ignites all of this. Graham Lee in his work shares people that play together stay together. And so there's some linkages in here with psychological safety, creation, co-creation, synergy. So that's just touching on that a little bit. I'm conscious, Claire, I've been talking quite a bit and you haven't, has that helped a little bit with some of those questions?
It has, absolutely. And I don't have set questions with these things, so I love it when I always invite people that I know will talk, and I find these things so fascinating. There is a question, so we'll bring that up now around well, actually, Phil, maybe I'll bring you in to ask that question.
I think I've got exactly what I've written. It was really just this argument that you said of Brown's view that the opposite of play is depression. And it strikes me that although that may be a nice idea to those of us who are believers, it's not helpful to persuade people who are skeptics, because at a level of logic, when I am not playing, that doesn't mean I am depressed. That's, speaking for me, that's a truism, and I think in general it's a truism. So I'm just interested in how helpful you think that particular distinction is.
Yeah, I think that's such a good question, Phil. And I think, to a degree, yes, you're right. But and I think, for people that are skeptical, it's interesting. It would be nice to have a conversation around that. And where are the layers there, and what's leading to some of those questions. And really, I'm talking about what is our understanding of play and playfulness. And in the book itself, we're talking about, using different language can be a way of breaking down some of that barrier. So, experimentation, exploration, inviting, thinking about the technical work that I do. So I work with a lot of technical teams in very serious situations, high stakes, as I said. So the invite might be as, should we play with the idea a bit more? Or other language might be used. Should we experiment? How can we kick this around a little bit to look at it from all different angles? And straight away, then you're moving into a more playful state, which is allowing you to be able to step back, get out of the head almost, get out of the kind of emotions and stress that might be hijacking into a safe space where you can actually look at whatever the thing is and start to play with it and tackle it with a different way of being. Often then it drops some of the stress elements to it. It invites creativity. It invites these ideas of, well, let's just spin it all out and see what lands, which is what you really need for co-creation. So one bit that I haven't spoke about yet is some kind of, if you imagine kind of a spectrum or layer of how play and playfulness is showing up. When we spoke to a lot of our storytellers and in our own practice with myself and Steph Wheeler, who's the co-author of the book and really the catalyst for this research, what we found is that all emotions can come into a playful coaching or team coaching space in the right way. So, it's not all about jovial humor, and that's all. Actually, in much of my work, which can be, very serious, a lot of stress, or people having trauma to some degree, having worked in certain work environments with certain managers and cultures, just the ability to be able to step back, step out of, look at things from a different way. And we might not be using that word play, but we might be bringing in the factors of that, equips them then to be better able to let go of some of the barriers and step into a more free thinking, free being state. And from that state, more possibilities start to arrive. So hopefully that helps a little bit, Phil. But I do take that on board. So I think, it's all an exploration, isn't it? And, it would be wonderful to explore more, particularly for people that are, like you said, skeptical. How do we engage in it in an accessible way?
And I think I'm going to bring in another storyteller now, and there's questions coming through, so I do want to leave some time for questions at the end. But Alison kind of mentioning there that so much of this starts with words, and Christine, that was something that you picked up on in terms of positioning and kind of coming back to the problem. I think is a really nice way to talk about this. So people, lots of the things we were talking about there, Teresa, in terms of co-creation, collaboration, psychological safety, all things that I think organisations have high on their agenda, and actually starting there and talking about that, a really nice way to introduce it. So thank you. I know we're going to have lots more questions for you at the end, but I'm going to introduce Callum now. Callum, I've got slides for you, so let me share them straight away so that I'm doing my job properly. Okay. Callum is brilliant. I've known Callum for a long time. He knows a lot about a lot of stuff. And he has written, we believe, the only research, but if anyone knows of any other, feel free to pop it into the chat, research into real play as a coaching intervention to facilitate soft skills goal attainment. Goodness. Well said. So you can tell us a bit about that, and I am driving the slides, so just let me know when you want me to move forward. But Callum, over to you.
Thanks. It's interesting to hear about checking yourself in terms of whether it was Christian or Teresa talking about when to use the word play or gamification. And I'm sure any of us who have worked in an office environment, when we hear the word role play, we're like, no, don't do that. And it puts people straight into their panic zone straight away. And so I felt it would be an important part to start off by differentiating between real play and role play. And so, this research that I did was for my master's in coaching and behavioural change. And it was a thematic analysis that I conducted for looking at what would be the lived experience of someone who would experience real play, not in a training environment, but in a coaching environment. But to explain what real play is, this graphic that you can see there is real play is contained within role play. And role play originates from something called psychodrama. And psychodrama was conceptualized in the 1920s by Jacob Moreno, who was a Romanian American psychotherapist, medical doctor, and among other things was also in his own time a theatre director. And he essentially invented group therapy, and he called it psychodrama, which was bringing drama to help individuals and groups explore their truth. And so the idea of real play and role play came in there. And I'll explain a bit more in a second about the differences between real play and role play. But in essence, within psychodrama, you're creating a simulation of events. So you're creating a safe barrier to experiment, to play with ideas around where there are no consequences for you in the bigger world. So in essence, it's all encompassed within experiential learning, which is what I've been involved in explicitly for 23 years, particularly using theatre arts as a vehicle for people to be able to use that. So on the next slide, you'll see just a simple XY axis that looks at role play as a concept. And you can see if you look in the northern and southern hemisphere there, you've got real play and surreal play. So all of this is role play that you're looking in there. So if I were to work with you and you were practicing at being yourself and practicing a conversation or exploring your roles within society, so you could be a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a volunteer, a son, a shop worker. All of these are social constructs. And so you have a personal identity that's associated with that role, but so do those people around you. And you feel the pressure of that social construct and what people expect of you as that role model, so that you should be modeling that role. So that's all within that role theory. And then role play is playing within role theory and looking at how you express yourself and explore and experiment with getting to know those roles. As any of you who have a child, you'll know that you're not automatically become a parent and know exactly what to do. You have to experiment with what that is, and you also need to play and learn from others about what's coming in. And I'm sure you get lots of advice being a new parent from other people who know perfectly well how to do it. And so the real side of it in the Northern Hemisphere is looking at what is real for you. And then the surreal side of it is then moving into, so you can play around with an abstract concept, such as you can play with being fear, being anger, or you could simply be another person. I could be Claire. I could try and be Claire as I'm playing around. And so I'd be taking that into a surreal play environment. Improvised, I make it up on the spot, and controlled is we set some parameters about what we're going to be doing in that environment. Do we have another slide on there? We do, don't we? So I'm not going to go into any detail on this, but this in essence is conceptual mapping of how you would introduce real play as a coaching intervention. And I'll leave that up there for you to look through at the moment. First thing I would say is the most important thing is probably coming back to something in what Phil and Teresa were talking about, is that's all very well if you're bought into it already. Yeah, let's experiment with this. Let's see what's going on. But what about those who are not ready for it, who are skeptical to it, who are just not comfortable getting into that environment? And I would say the most important thing is you must spend time before you go into this gung-ho. You must spend time building people's comfort to move into a playful space. And one of the techniques that I used to use with people before we would get into that. When we did it face to face, it's a lot more difficult now to do it where so much coaching is done virtually. Is I would bring a pack of cards and I'd say, okay, I want us to get into creative headspace. I want us to be into the middle of this rather than into the middle of what we've just come from. I've just come from something, you've just come from something. Let's get into the middle of this. Let's start with a game of Snap. The advantage of a game of Snap is we know it's a game. You don't have to spend forever learning the rules to a game of Snap. You split the cards in two. If they match, you bang your hand down and you shout Snap, and you get to keep those cards. Very simple. Most adults know how to play it, and they don't need an invite to be competitive usually. So it's a very simple way of getting people into a playful mode. And once they've done that, you're moving them from neurostability, which is right and wrong. I've got to perform the right way. This is a logical conversation that we're having, into saying, actually, let's just play around and see what happens. Another way you can do that, getting people into play, is I'll share my screen. And if you just type into the chat box, what you see. I'm sharing my screen now. Just type in the chat box. What can you see? What do you see? Okay, good. Thank you very much for that. Now, I'm going to invite you all to remember yourselves somewhere between the ages of 3 and 5 years old. Remember yourselves as that 3 and 5 year old, what you're wearing, what the air smells like, the sounds that surround you. What are those? Your early memories, those sounds. What are those sounds? What does the air feel like? What does it smell like? What are you wearing? What's your haircut that your parents have bestowed upon you? Now tell me, as that young child, what do you see? Type into the chat box. What do you see? Talk to me as that child. What do you see? Challenge yourself. Look closer. Look deeper. What does that 3, 4, 5-year-old really see? Type into the chat box. It's great. So keep thinking about it, keep putting those in. And as you're putting those in, if I were your coach and you said it's a cheeky smile or it's stuff, I can then say to you, elaborate. Tell me more about that. What else is within that? What's within that? And what's within that? And now I'm tapping into your creative, playful side. I haven't called it play at any point, but I'm encouraging you to play. I'm encouraging you to get rid of right and wrong. And in fact, when you work with me in a face-to-face space, if I'm working with you on presentation skills or personal impact or executive impact, I'll ask you to introduce yourself. And I'll say one caveat. I want everybody to introduce themselves here to everybody else, but I want you, one caveat, I want you to get it wrong. However, whatever that means to you, just get it really, really wrong. Because in the corporate world, we're so obsessed with getting something right that when somebody says to you, get it wrong, you're like, I don't know what you mean. What do you mean? I don't understand. Just get it wrong. I don't understand. Whatever that means for you, just get it wrong. And they start saying, and they start talking, and then people in the room giggle because they say their name back to front, or they just say, I'm not going to say anything, I'm done. And people laugh and people applaud. And all of a sudden, within this societal role of norms, we're encouraging people to release themselves, to give themselves permission to not have boundaries, to not get things right, but in fact to get things wrong. And that's really how I introduce people to play without even saying the word.
Fantastic. And Callum and I do presentation skills work together often, and I love having Callum in the room because he is such a presence. And this idea of flow and permission and getting things wrong, I think, has been a theme throughout the morning. I want to bring other voices in now. So there are some questions on the chat. If you put a question in, feel free to either put your cameras on and ask it, or ask it just by shouting out. I think we'll do it that way rather than have me kind of go back and try and work out where the questions are. But any questions for either Callum or Teresa or Christian, I can think of lots, or you might have questions of each other. So feel free to use the time.
I'll kick off then. Using play or gamification, how have you developed a shift in behavior from kind of the safe play environment and into the into everyday work? So breaking down those barriers of trust and things that often exist in the workplace, but when you're in a playful, low stakes environment, it's much easier to have to let go of those inhibitions.
Thank you. Who would like to answer that one? Teresa?
I can start. Yeah, it's a lovely question. So much of my work is with teams and leaders within work environments. So often we are in an office, but the minute we step into the room, pretty much like Callum was saying, really, we might not be using the word play per se, but from the outset of the contracting, I will be sharing that we'll use all sorts of things, whatever is useful for the person team to get to where they're going to be. And I might bring some stuff, so whether it's coloured pens, Post-its, just little symbols that are within the room. We might never use them, but there's an invite there. So while we're not going in with the intention of, right, let's have a playful, play on, which can really be quite off-putting, if you're coming in super engaged and planned and controlled, particularly, if you haven't set the comfort, if you don't have the trust, if you don't have the engagement. There's this subtleties all within, as well as in the contracting, that says, if and when play emerges, it's okay, there's permission. And I think someone in the chat wrote about, some of the language that we're using. So the what if question is normally really good, or let's give it a go. So very much from the Gestalt world, they talk about a give it a go-ness. And also, like I mentioned with the bridge image, that way of being. So it's within you, and people know that, we can step into a space if it's useful. So it's on an invite. Shall we draw a picture about this? Would it be helpful? Should we model it? Should we step into an experiment and explore? These are some ways that I've never been turned down in all the years that I've been doing this. I've never been turned down on an engaged step into, let's explore more, whatever it is we're doing.
I was going to just bring Christian in, because I know that Callum and Teresa, and similar to the way that I work, will have a contract in the coaching sense. We will have a group in front of us. But Christian, I'm right in thinking that people were able to tap into the game when they wanted to. So how did that work in terms of getting people that permission to play in their work day?
So parallel, I hope it's parallel. I'm not mispronouncing that. It's a great question. For me, it's the real rub of whether this stuff works or not. So for me, I was having people use a digital experience, as a new starter or as an annual competition. We have 20,000 people a year. 10,000 people, 10 or 15. There's about 18,000 people a year participate in one global tournament where they're all playing against each other to find out who's the number one, competitor at the firm. But then the next day, when they're out at clients, talking with clients about how we can help them and their problems and all the rest of it, for me, that's when I want to be in their sort of, in the back of their brain there, having improved their awareness of what happens so that they can then have a better conversation. And what we did, Parallel, is we then ran a competition where we got all of our players to share stories back about how using the platform or playing the game had then helped them have a better client conversation. And so we're able to then share back with the skeptical business about whether this stuff works or not. It's like, well, here are 10 stories that from the last 12 months that have resulted in additional opportunities in our systems. So for me, it's not a case of like the play can stop, because for me, the whole point is I'm just trying to keep you awake while you're learning stuff. And then so that then when you're later on doing your real job, out there actually generating revenue, that for me, that's the point where I just want you to have remembered what I've tried to teach you. So those feelings of sort of that the other panel members are talking about, for me, they're gone as soon as they stop playing the experience and they're back at their drudgy job. That's where I want them there at that point.
And I guess with all these things, it's a spectrum, isn't it? You always have some people who are much more willing to jump in and give things a go, and then people at the other end who will be the last ones to kind of dip their toe into the water. Callum, any thoughts? I'm sure you have some thoughts on that, and do please keep the questions coming.
Just realized I put myself on mute. No, I would have nothing further to contribute to that. I would agree on both the points that were made on that. I think it's also about, we're not mind readers. It's about engaging with the other person and saying, if you offer up the concept of play, you can ask them what it means for them. What are they comfortable doing? What are they uncomfortable doing? But I also say to them that learning is done in a discomfort zone. It's not done in a panic zone. It's not done in a comfort zone. It's in the stretch zone. And so what does that mean for them? What are examples of that? And I would also encourage them to give me an example when they last played and what they learned from that play. So again, it's about taking them by the hand rather than shoving them over the playful cliff and saying, go on, play. That's they'll go into the panic zone. They'll close up and they just will not engage, and it'll be your fault.
I guess that my question was more around less about how you do the contracting at the start to get people engaged in whether it's gamification or using play to develop, whether it's an awareness or a practice. But then when they go, it's within a very set environment, but when they go back into their work environments, it's a little bit more of what Christian was saying. When you go back into your work environments, what's the impact? And how do you get that impact? Because the work that I do, I'm really focusing on how do we get those lasting behavioral shifts within the team dynamic in the real life, because it's all very well and good being in a nice cozy room and having low stakes environment to practice and talk in, but then you go back to your high stakes negotiation or deal or client conversation, and that will how do you get the transference, not just the knowledge?
So I think for me, I'll start to answer that one, and again, I'm sure the others will have things to say. I think we've spoken a lot today about what is the purpose of the game, what's the purpose of the play, what are you trying to achieve? And I'll talk about it in the context of Lego Serious Play, which is something that I do a lot with. And if you use Lego Serious Play as a way of exploring how people are as a team, you can explore values across the team with Lego Serious Play. And in a low stakes environment, you start to tap into things that you perhaps weren't aware of, and you start to share things. And there are very intentional ways that you can take that into the kind of the day job. So I have worked with teams where we have explored communication, how that looks for individuals, how that looks across the team. And from that, created an intention of, okay, well, this is how we are going to communicate going forward based on, what we have done in the low stakes environment. And part of that is thinking about permission. So we've given ourselves permission to talk about this. We've, you know, if you do it in a more intentional way, people have seen it. And I think one of the things that Christian has picked up on, and it's one of the things that really strikes me with Lego Serious Play, it sticks in a way that, you know, I'm sure the academics in the virtual room and the academics that you were talking to, Christian, can talk about the stickability better than I can. But that ability to be able to recall it when the stakes are high is part of the attraction for me of doing it. And much like with Christian, and getting people to engage in a game that they then are having a client meeting and think, I remember when I, you know, won that point, or, you know, my man went faster, and you know, that was, you know, it just comes to mind. Christian, I don't know if you've got anything to add, or Callum or Teresa, you can probably say it in a more learned way than me, but
yeah, and parallel my previous comment about, you know, people going back to their dreary jobs. You know, for me, it's back at the coalface, not the dreary job. It's not the fun, you know, it's not the fun training environment. It's back when you're working hard and you know, working away. But I just made a comment there about it's not just knowledge uplift. We also found over 70% of people were more confident speaking with clients as well. So they had a subjectively their own assessment of their confidence improved for most people as well. So you've got a bit of a knowledge uplift, then you've got more confidence. And all it takes is for consultants to, you know, help a couple of clients off their own bat, and you get a great sense of pride about doing that. Now you want to help more clients, and it just sort of grows and grows. So for us, we're really, really proud to have helped a lot of people with their own personal journeys about how they could become better professional services providers.
And I think,
can I add on to that
yeah,
for Perel as well, in terms of getting that stickiness of taking it from the, okay, you've experienced it, now how do we make that stick back in the world environment? Is, again, as a coach, I would be encouraging meta learning to say, okay, so based on what you've learned, what you've experienced, how do you take that back into the workplace and encourage that to stick? How do you take responsibility for that stickiness? And it's about then having them explore and say, what else can you do? What else can you do? What else can you do? And that I do a lot of as a coach, because it's about taking that that experience, that positive experience they've had, and turning that into a lived experience back in the workplace.
Can I ask a question of Christian?
absolutely.
Thank you. I think if I've understood correctly, Christian, what you're describing is your original remit was around changing knowledge levels through learning, and that then led to changing behaviours. I'm wondering if any of the other things you've talked about started with a different point, which is fitting, I guess, with what Parul and Callum were just talking about. In other words, the request was, we need to change people's behaviours. How do we use gamification for that?
Yeah, so we at the start of the COVID response, actually, we needed our people to respond differently to how they've always done client discussions and talking. It used to be, hey, let's go for coffee, let's go for lunch, let's go for a beer. That's just been what these really successful BD people did forever. It's just what they've done. Now all of a sudden you take away those tools, and we had to get our people to change how they were behaving and how they were acting with clients. So we actually ran a bunch of interactive video simulations that got them into gray areas, and and showing like which decisions they could make about how they could engage with people. And obviously, anytime you do interactive video simulations, you've got to go a bit over the top with how badly things go, just so that it can be a bit fun for people, because it can be a bit boring otherwise. So, you know, we've used interactive video simulation to try and help people think about how they're reacting to situations, but also how they're planning situations out as well.
And some parallels there, I'm sure, with Callum and the real play.
Yes, it's exactly that. It's quite it is transformative, because people are learning through experience. I was working with somebody. I was in Singapore a couple of weeks ago, and they had a keynote speaker there. And one of the things that they brought up is they were saying, you know, you can't change people's beliefs. Only they will change their beliefs. But what you can give them is experiences to nourish the beliefs that they have. And I think, you know, if you're trying to tell people that, you know, the grass is greener on the other side, it's not going to work. It's for them to experience what that is. And it comes back to what I was saying when I showed you that graphic, whether it's real play, role play, psychodrama, simulation, play is part of experiential learning. And so if you give people the environment where they can learn through experience, their beliefs will naturally change. And once their beliefs are changed, you're now tapping into their intrinsic motivation to pass that learning on to other people. So it does cascade, and it does become cultural change within the organization.
I think I could, as I've probably said already, I could keep on talking all day, but I won't. I think that's a really lovely place to end things. I'm really grateful for everyone in the audience who has participated and asked questions. So thank you. I'm also obviously incredibly grateful to Callum, Christian and Teresa for giving their time to me, particularly Christian, who my parents always told me that if you want something asked, the worst that can happen is that someone says no. So I was absolutely thrilled when Christian said yes, because I was fully expecting a no. So I'm delighted that you were able to join us,
My pleasure.
the evening. Callum, you know me, so you have to say yes. And Teresa, I know Steph very well, so she twisted your arm. But thank you to the three of you for what has been a really fascinating start to Friday morning. And I hope that I give everyone permission to go and try and experiment, to fail a little bit today, and maybe even play a little bit today. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.